One of the most overrated and misrepresented topics in technology is self-hosting LLMs. There is some nuance to that take, so don't lose it just yet, but the fact is, for most organizations and individuals, the cost is simply not worth it. To put some concrete numbers behind that, assuming you're on AWS and each LLM request has 2,000 input tokens and 1,000 output tokens, and you want to use Claude Sonnet 4.6 compared to an equivalent open model like Llama 3.370B, you would need 1.1 million requests a month to break even. Now, for many people, that might not be a lot. If you're doing heavily agentic things, then 1.1 can happen very fast, especially if you have a lot of users. But for most organizations, and especially if you're just an individual, you are not going to see that type of volume. And so if you're just looking from a cost lens, it's hard to justify it's actually going to be worth it unless you're seeing a lot of traffic and unless you're in a mature place with your AI usage. Now, I did say there's some nuance to this, and there really is. So one of the first things to consider is security. So if you're in a scenario where you have strict customer contracts and data just cannot leave your environment, then yes, you have to self-host. You have no choice, and it is what it is. Now, with security, I find that people tend to lean on that argument a little too heavily without fully understanding the implications and just what it really means to use a managed model. If you're on something like AWS Bedrock, using Claude, they cannot train on your data. It's legally binding there. Like it's going to stay in AWS. You're going to have your own provision environment where the data is going to the model and it's not going to Claude to be trained. So people just, as soon as they say or they hear managed model, they think, oh, they're going to train on my data. I can't use it. Like, no, that's not always true. If you're using Anthropic directly or you're using OpenAI, like, yes, they're going to train on your model. They're very clear about that fact. They're going to train on your data. But there are providers out there who have guarantees to where they won't train on your data. There are other security implications that you need to dig in and understand fully, but be careful just jumping straight to, it left my environment, therefore it's getting trained on. So keep that in mind and understand that nuance as you're balancing what it means from a security perspective. So the second one is business maturity from the perspective of AI. So if your company is just getting started with AI and you're not confident that you're going to be fully committed to AI, be very careful investing the hours and the time and the money. Hours and time, kind of the same thing. Be careful investing deeply in AI infrastructure before you validated the business idea and before you know that the business is fully committed. One of the best things about software engineers is that we love complex things. One of the worst things about software engineers is we love complex things. And so be careful falling in love with the more complex, more sophisticated, more scalable solution. If your business has 50,000 LLM requests a month and you don't have strict security requirements and you can strip your PII from data if you have any before you send it off to the model, understand these things before you go and say, hey, yeah, we need a multi-node GPU cluster and we're going to go open model all the way. Understand what that means from a business perspective, not just from technology. But speaking of technology, also consider your maturity from a technology perspective and as an engineering group. First answer, how mature are we from an ML ops and AI ops perspective? If you do not have strong ML ops capabilities, you probably don't have any business self-hosting LLMs. It's more than just the GPU versus token cost. It's the cost to maintain, it's the cost to scale. If you have real scaling requirements, you're not going to be able to just support a single GPU, or you're not going to be able to just be on single node. You're going to need to scale that out, probably with something like Kubernetes. So understand what sort of capabilities and what's the maturity from a machine learning and LLM, AI, whatever you want to call it, perspective, and then right size your technology choice accordingly. Because what you don't want to do is go pursue this real sexy, fancy AI infrastructure that then is making your team go broke because it's just a nightmare to maintain. And servers are hard to maintain. Inference servers are probably the hardest to maintain, especially if you're using LLMs, getting the full GPU utilization out of your servers. And then scaling those out, monitoring those, they're going to go down at times and you're gonna need someone to go in and fix that. That's somebody's role. That's one or multiple people who are gonna have to keep the lights on as well as stand up the servers in the first place. So understand your maturity from an engineering perspective before you go all in on self-hosting. Now, if you're in the camp of AI is first class at my organization from a business and an engineering maturity perspective, and we have the scale, then yeah, go for it. There's really no, that you've checked the boxes. And that's something you've proven as a team you need, then yeah, you go take that on. It makes much more sense. But make sure it makes sense before you take that step. So another, I think kind of, I wouldn't call it hidden, but maybe even more nuanced is it's flexibility. So in the age of AI, flexibility is king. Being able to adapt to new technology using the newest, latest, best models is sometimes the name of the game. Not always, but oftentimes we want to be able to use the latest model. We want to be able to do that quickly. So answer the question, is it a lot easier to change out an API key, or is it a lot easier to go and pull down the weights and go stand up an inference server for some new version of a model? That question answers itself. Now, not to say you can't have really robust ML ops capabilities where it's maybe more seamless to stand up the newest, latest version of the model. Sure, that's true. But it's no secret that open source models are not as good as frontier models. I'm sorry, you got to go argue with the tree on that one. It is what it is. I know that everyone loves fine tuning, and we love our fine tuning stack, and SLMs are better than frontier models. Define better. How much engineering hours did it take for you to get better? And then what's the cost to move off that? What's the cost to get to a new model, a better model? What happens when next month someone releases a new model that solved the problem you spent 6 months fine tuning on or fine tuning to solve? I know I had one experience where we had some real high throughput requirements when we're using Gen AI, and we were really struggling with the performance of the model for what we were specifically trying to do. And so we did go down the route of hey, maybe we should fine tune here. This seems like it could be a case where we need to be able to, we just need some stronger capabilities to our task. We spent a few weeks to POC, and we got to a point where we're okay, it does these things well, that we've spent the time to gather the training set and train for these things, and we try to be general, but we're on a time crunch. We're trying to validate idea and fail fast, and so we get to a point a couple weeks in, and the responses are okay, but we can quickly see this is the amount of time it's going to take for us to get to a truly the level we need to support this product we're building. It's just going to take too long. We don't have time from a business sense, and then from an engineering perspective, we just had too much going on to say, yeah, we're going to settle in and prioritize fine-tuning this and supporting this from here on till, as long as we can see. Ultimately, we did some more testing and found we went with one of the Gemini variants that actually worked pretty well enough, and as well as they have nice enough throughput requirements that we were able to do what we needed to do. And so we gained a lot of flexibility, and maybe we would have gotten to a point where the fine-tuned model would have just been better, but at how long and at what cost? Because time to market is often king. Engineering hours matter a lot. And then do we spend 3 months getting that fine-tuned model just right, and then there's a new version of some other model that gets launched and it solved our problem? And so it's important to define, okay, what's acceptable? If you're at 95%, you're 95% of the way there, and you're using a closed model, and fine-tuning you think is going to get you to 97, well, it's really important to understand, is it worth it to get to that 97? 2%, maybe that 2% is the most important to the business because it's specific scenarios where it's got to be right. Okay, yeah, then you would say we can't go live until we get to this 97%. These numbers are arbitrary, but it's just to, help us measure things. But you need to understand the implications of when you go down this path of, I want to support infrastructure, I want to fine-tune models. Define what it means to be worth it, and really be rigorous in backing that up. And prove to yourself you really do need to fine-tune. Prove that you do need infrastructure. Have concrete numbers behind that. And have experiments behind that, especially if you're considering fine-tuning. Because what you don't want to have happen is you decide you need to fine-tune. You jump straight to that. And then it takes you 4 months to get the model out the door. And maybe that's a really long time, but say it takes 4 months. And then the business is frustrated because they needed it in 2 months. And then in 3 months, someone launches a model that solves your problem and you didn't have a concrete reason why you wanted to go this fine tune, and you didn't prove like, okay, we're actually 95% of the way there. The business is okay with that, so we're gonna choose to live with that. If you just arbitrarily decide like fine tuning's better, we're gonna pursue that, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. So it's important to put all of these things in front of you before deciding what is the right technology stack for my AI infrastructure. So right size from each of these pillars. Consider security, consider your business maturity, consider engineering maturity, and then consider the flexibility cost and whether you really need, like, do you need flexibility, or are you better off being tied down to something that solves a very niche capability that you and only you can solve? Maybe that's true. But put all these things into consideration before blindly assuming that self-hosting or cloud managed is better than the other. So that said, go build.